Hello everyone, today's topic is extremely sensitive and I'm already expecting to get a lot of backlash. We're going to try to find out if ancient Egyptian civilization can be considered an African civilization, including from an ethnic point of view. You probably already know why I'm making this distinction, or if not, you'll understand very quickly. It's a subject that's much more complex than some authors like to claim, and much more interesting than it seems. While today, it is widely considered that modern humans appeared in Africa. Although there are differing theories, it's necessary to frame today's topic. Otherwise, any civilization could claim to have African origins if we base ourselves solely on this reasoning. So what do we mean by African civilization? Today, we will consider as an African civilization a people who are, one, that appeared in Africa, and two, having left its primitive condition and having developed on the continent without having previously left it or having developed elsewhere. Africa here is understood as the physical geographical notion, that is, the African continent. Nowadays, many theories clash on the subject, some of which unfortunately serve an identity or political agenda rather than a scientific one, and have shifted the debate toward the ethnic notions mentioned in the introduction. This is the case, for example, of the Senegalese Egyptologist Cheikh Anta Diop, who believes that ancient Egyptian civilization is, I quote, a black civilization. Many have sought or are still seeking today to claim the civilization of ancient Egypt, whether they are Westerners, Easterners, or Africans. Fundamentally nowadays, the civilization belongs only to itself, since all that remains are its magnificent monumental and cultural vestiges, as a result of centuries of foreign occupation diluting it, until the land of Egypt entered the modern and Islamic era of its history. Nevertheless, the question of the Africanness of Egyptian civilization indeed goes beyond the strictly historical framework, since geneticists and anthropologists, among others, have gotten involved, contributing their part to the matter. A number of studies have thus attempted to take a cross-disciplinary approach, allowing for a methodical and calm response to this subject, and I have to admit that the question was much more complex and less obvious than I thought when I started working on the subject. First of all, the ancient Egyptians do seem to be an African civilization, including ethnically, but contrary to what Afrocentric perspectives claim, speaking in quotes, and I quote again about a black Egypt. Based on the work of the many authors you'll find in the description, the question of their ethnicity cannot be summed up with a straightforward answer. The anthropologist Nancy Lovell considers that the first populations of the Nile Valley can be considered as being of African lineage, but they show variations compared to other human groups in the area, linked to different evolutionary factors. In simpler terms, they are of a unique ethnicity with characteristics that are specific to them. The latter adds, just as Egyptologist Barry Kemp, anthropologist Shomar K. Kaida, and the many geneticists who have worked on the subject do. As I mentioned in the description, it seems that the country experienced external genetic influences very early on, prior to the birth of ancient Egyptian civilization, such as significant so-called Asian influences, which should be understood as coming from the ancient Middle East, particularly present in the north, and so-called tropical African influences in the south, mixing with the first populations of the Nile Valley. These differences in appearance are similar to what we see, for example, in India, where a Gujarati and a Tamil have very different looks, although they are clearly identifiable and recognizable as Indian. Moreover, it should also be noted that it seems the ancient Egyptian genetic heritage changed very little over the centuries, despite successive invasions. From this perspective, a strict classification does not seem to make sense, and such an approach merely repeats racial concepts from the 19th century, which, it should be remembered, are completely foreign to the civilization of ancient Egypt, whose identity was more cultural and religious than ethnic. And for good reason, as you now understand, the ethnic scope of the ancient civilization seems to be broad and non-exclusive. Moreover, some theories claim that the ruling dynasties of ancient Egypt had origins outside of Africa. Here too, this theory seems to be dismissed by anthropologists who do note a difference between the ruling classes and other segments of the population. But this difference is only very relative and is linked to genetic drift, caused by the fact that these social classes tended to marry among themselves and not with other layers of society at the time. In short, trying to fit the civilization of ancient Egypt, whose history spans more than 3,000 years, into one of its ethnic boxes in quotation marks is more a matter of ego, identity doubt, and politics than of history or science. All that being said, pharaohs from tropical Africa, that is, as Cheikh Anta Diop understands it, did indeed rule during the 25th dynasty. Pharaohs from Napata in Nubia. These pharaohs, who came from the south and were ethnically Nubian, unified the country, which had previously been divided into small rival kingdoms following the collapse of central power. Even before the complete unification of the country, they fully claimed ancient Egyptian culture as a result of the millennia-long occupation of Nubian territory by the Egyptians, which was interrupted by periods of chaos. And they temporarily restored the central authority of the pharaohs, to the point of even challenging the Assyrians, before experiencing a violent backlash which put an end to the dynasty's epic story. In the same way, during the Ayyad period, that is, the Macedonian period of Egypt, the pharaohs had the Greek and Macedonian type, which is very different from both the Nubians and the ancient Egyptians. To conclude, the civilization of ancient Egypt therefore seems to be an African civilization and should be considered as such. Nevertheless, it appears that a strict ethnic perspective on the subject does not make much sense and comes more from a politicized, activist, or identity-based viewpoint than from a historical or scientific one. Thank you for following D-Mystif, history, subscribe, and, above all, don't forget the little bell. Tell me in the comments what you think about today's topic. I'm already expecting there to be quite an atmosphere. The fight, yes. As a reminder, you can support the channel financially very simply by voluntarily watching ads on Utip. The link is in the description. See you very soon.